Susie,
Rob,
so if you were a dinosaur and you thought that asteroid was coming, do you think you'd behave any differently? Would you do anything differently?
I actually haven't ever put any thought to that, Rob. No, I've not ever thought about if I was a dinosaur, what would I do in any context, let alone if I saw a big asteroid coming. I mean, I don't know. The dinosaurs I work on, I don't think they had the biggest brains. They probably
Yeah,
mainly just ate and mated. That was probably what they did. So I'd
quite
probably just carry,
focused.
yeah, quite focused. Probably
Yeah.
just carry on mating and eating, and wait to be vaporized, I expect.
Well, I guess the second question is if we thought there was some big planet changing emergency and climate crisis coming directly towards us, barreling at us at a rate of knots, do you think that we as a human society would do anything differently?
Actually, I think maybe that's a great answer for what would you do if you knew that there was a planet ending, civilization ending asteroid coming towards you?
Yeah.
Just eat and mate, basically.
Eater, mate. Well,
See, the same as what I would do if I was a dinosaur.
let's see if we can learn some lessons from dinosaurs today. So this week we're doing something a bit different. We are happy to have our first ever guest, and that is Professor Steve Brusatte. Welcome, Steve.
Hi
Woohoo!
guys, Susie, Rob. Thanks for having me. Very honored to be your first guest on your podcast. So yeah, let's talk about mass death and extinction and global catastrophe.
Let's. So just to introduce, Steve probably doesn't require any introduction, but Steve is a professor of paleontology and evolution at the University of Edinburgh, and he's been there for some time. How long have you been there, Steve? A long time, right?
I moved here 2013. I moved here like a few days after Obama's second inauguration. It's a very different time back then, leaving America. I was
Yeah,
a bit sad to leave America then, and now I look
yeah.
back on that and say, thank God I was hired in Scotland.
Mm,
So it's been a while, but I'm, very much at home here in
yeah.
Scotland and in the UK.
So Steve and I first met when he was doing his master's at Bristol, where he overlapped with me doing his PhD. No, I was doing my PhD, he was doing his master's, but we overlapped so we know each other for a long time. But I guess I don't see you very often. But you and Susie must bump into each other more often in dinosaur world.
Well, particularly we bumped into each other online. We were in a meeting yesterday. We're
Oh,
doing an event next week together. So yeah, we quite regularly see each other, don't we, Steve?
yeah.
It's always a pleasure. And I remember actually, I got to confess for Rob, I don't remember the first time we met. I guess something in Bristol in, the
Mm.
autumn of 2006 when I started my master's and I was part of the annoying flock of new master's students. But Susie, I remember when we first met, and that was at that SVP in Ottawa, where we shared that
Ah.
taxi. I don't know if you remember. And you paid for the taxi, and I, owed you a few beers. I think I bought you one beer to pay for the rest of the taxi, but I think I owe you another one next time we meet. But it's been
Oh,
a
that's
while.
great
It's been
news.
almost 20 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
That
incredible.
that's great news. I will call in that beer at SVP next week then.
Yes, I'm
Great.
happy to
Fantastic.
I'm happy to provide it. And that was a great meeting because it was at that meeting that you also, when we were in the taxi, I remember you said there's this young guy who's just starting a PhD recently at Cambridge who also is interested in theropods, and you should meet this guy and I'll introduce him to you at SVP. And that turned out to be Roger. So lots of things
Ah.
happened at that meeting. Amazingly, when we were all students or recently graduated students almost 20 years ago, and here we are.
So it's nice to think that you've got this debt from 20 years ago for a beer. I mean, I was also at the meeting, and I have a picture somewhere of me dancing cheek to cheek with a very confused Per Elberg because I got a bit too drunk and overexcited. But
Everybody has a photo
uh,
like that.
Everyone has that
everybody,
photo, Rob. Everyone has that
everyone.
photo.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
shame. Shame. But let's move on quickly. So I was introducing Steve, wasn't I? So Steve has been doing all sorts of research on dinosaurs, extinction, big biodiversity. Also, author, Rise and Fall of Dinosaurs and Rise and Reign of Mammals. I mean, maybe you'll tell us a bit about those later. But you
Happy to
also work as a
plug the books
scientist.
later, as
Yeah, you
always.
can plug.
Yes.
We'll reserve some time for you to plug. Don't worry.
I'll plug the new
But
book
what
and I will make sure to do it
a new
repeatedly.
book? Oh, I kind of want to
Oh,
skip to that.
yeah.
No, no, we'll,
Oh, we
we'll
will
save
get to
that. We'll
that.
save
We
that.
need
Yeah.
people to keep
Yeah,
listening.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the little enticing
Yeah.
nugget. But the reason we want to talk to you today was about your recent paper with Andrew Flynn and lots of other colleagues published in Science. So this is late surviving. Sorry, let me just get the title up. Late surviving New Mexican dinosaurs illuminate high-end Cretaceous diversity and provinciality. Published mere days ago was this October the 23rd. So we're recording on November the 5th. So this is quite exciting stuff, big news splash stuff. So Steve, do you want to explain to us a bit of context to where we're coming from? So I guess this is the age-old question: were dinosaurs suffering from some sort of decline before the asteroid hit, or were they thriving? I guess that's the context of where this paper's starting, right?
Right, and that's why these kind of studies are relevant for journals like Science. If these were, I don't know, Silurian bryozoans or something, they wouldn't be getting these science papers. But this debate about dinosaurs, of course, goes way back. And this paper, which Andrew Flynn, who's an early career geologist, he's a professor at New Mexico State University, and we've worked together for many years on this field crew in New Mexico, which we can talk about. There's many colleagues that over more than a decade of annual fieldwork, a lot of collection of not just fossils, but of geological data, sedimentological data, geochronological data. We can all go into that, but it all came together in this study. And the relevance really is that through the fossils that we have and also the new dates that we have on these rocks, we can tell that these dinosaurs were living right at the very end of the Cretaceous, within the last few 100,000 years at most. And we also then did some ecological, statistical, food web type of analyses as
Mhm.
well to show that dinosaur communities at the very end of the Cretaceous were still quite diverse. And I'm sure we can unpack a lot of that. But by and large, this is about what dinosaurs were doing before the asteroid hit. We all know the asteroid hit. That's not a debate. We have the crater. We know it happened. We know the Cretaceous ended with that 6 mile wide asteroid falling out of the sky. And the question is, did that strike down dinosaurs quickly when they were in their prime, or had dinosaurs been wasting away before then? It might seem like an open and shut debate, but actually it's been dinosaur paleontologists that have been some of the main skeptics for initially for the entire asteroid theory when the Alvarez team presented it, and then over the last few decades, skeptics to this idea that the asteroid actually caused the extinction. And so we hope that this paper provides some more insight into that. And the way we interpret the evidence here is that we have a thriving community of dinosaurs living right before the asteroid. And we think that that supports the idea that the dinosaurs, at least in some parts of the world, were still doing not only quite well, but really well up until that fateful moment.
Lovely. Before we dive in, I want to find out more about how you did it and what it means. But before we go into that, when I was reading this in preparation for it, Susie, I noticed that you get loads of citations in this. So you must have lots of opinions about this before this paper came along.
Yeah, so well, I haven't done a lot of work on this. I wrote a paper on this, I would
Okay.
say. But yeah, we so I wrote a paper on this that suggested that this idea of faunal provinciality, which we'll get into, uh, is the result of sampling biases. Now, it's really fantastic to see this paper because what we need to do to address sampling biases basically is find more fossils so that we can and have better constrained geochronology, and that's exactly what this paper does. So we said at the time, basically when we published that paper, we can't actually tell whether or not there's provinciality. There seems to be provinciality in the data that we have, but we can't tell that because of sampling biases. So yeah, hopefully what this paper tells and shows, and we'll get into, is sort of, yeah, it's not sampling bias. But we now know that thanks to having done loads more sampling, which is great. It's fantastic.
Cool. So let's place a bit of context then. I guess a lot of these information about this episode, like the very short period of time before the asteroid hit, most of it comes from North America, right? We're talking Hell Creek and around there. And the reason this paper is important is because we're looking a bit further south, but still in North America, but in New Mexico, right? But I mean, I guess I should ask Steve this, right? So you've got this rich site from New Mexico, but loads of discoveries from there. But I guess we didn't really know precisely how old it was until you guys came along. I mean, was that the main motivation of this? I mean, so you said you've been out there doing field work. Tell us about the field work, I guess.
Absolutely, the real key new piece of evidence in this paper is the age of the dinosaurs. These dinosaurs, we collect new ones all the time, and especially Tom Williamson, my good friend and colleague in New Mexico, is the curator at the museum. He and his teams collect new dinosaurs all the time. But the dinosaurs have been known for many decades. I don't, maybe even more than 100 years, actually. But what we have now is a very good date for those dinosaurs, and that pins them down to living really just an eye blink before the asteroid. The new dating comes from this big interdisciplinary team that we've been part of, many of us, for many years. And you'll see there's, I don't know, something like 15 authors on the paper, as is often the case with these papers. It's not just one or two people working alone. And that team of authors has a bunch of people. There's paleontologists on there, there's sedimentologists, there's geochronologists, there's statisticians and ecologists. And so, it all came together. We've done, at least for me, I not so much post-COVID, and after our son was born and everything, but before then, at least, I was going out there once a year, maybe multiple times a year, and working with Tom Williamson and Andrew Flynn, who's the lead author on the study, and Dan Pepe, Ross Secord, who are some of the other authors on the study, just going out in the San Juan Basin, up in the Four Corners area of New Mexico, and looking for fossils, for dinosaur fossils and for mammal fossils. Really, a lot of our work's been about mammals and how mammals recovered from the extinction, and how the very first placental mammal-dominated communities rose up. New Mexico, this part of New Mexico has some of the best fossils in the world of these very first placental mammal-dominated communities. And as we were doing this work, we were supported, by the way, by the National Science Foundation. We had a few NSF grants back when those things were a thing.
God.
And I don't know how much of your audience is American or how much is international or what, but these are very much. We had two big grants that funded this, that funded these big interdisciplinary teams, that funded a lot of students, funded some of my students, but also funded people like Andrew Flynn, who made his career, really, his whole foundation on this. Now, those grants would be unobtainable because we had the gall to work with the local Navajo tribe, whose land this all was. But that's DEI now, so these grants wouldn't be funded, which is a disgrace. But these were big teams, and we were collecting fossils, but we cared about the context of the fossils. We wanted to know the ages of the fossils to get a good chronology of how the dinosaurs are changing, and then how the mammals changed afterwards. And we also did a lot of geological work, measuring sections, the blue collar work of any field geologist, looking at the depositional environments, doing geochemical sampling to try to get proxies for things like temperature and precipitation, to look at changes in climate, and just to put it all together holistically to understand how the fossils were parts of these communities that were changing. But fundamentally, from the start, we knew we needed a good chronology. We knew we needed to date these rocks as accurately and precisely as possible. I'm a geochronologist, of course, but we worked with a great group of geochronologists, Dan Pepe's crew in Baylor. They're experts on paleomagnetism, and Matt Heisler in New Mexico, who's recently retired. He's one of the world's great radioisotopic or radiometric dating experts, and real pioneer with dating detrital zircons. And that's what we ended up doing here. We have some ash beds, especially in the Paleocene rocks after the extinction. Andrew published these a few years ago. We have a great chronology of these different faunas of mammals, down sometimes to the 10,000 year precision. But it's these detrital sanidines, these zircon crystals that were formed in some kind of lava, some kind of melt, that were then reworked into these sandstones, by these rivers that were burying these dinosaur bones, that we used in this paper. And being able to do this single crystal analysis of these zircons is just a game changer. And so this sort of thing is, many other people are doing it. Susie, I know, has experience with this as well. And we're going to see a lot more of it, which is great. And that gets around this issue that, we all know from the moment we take a geology class at the first year of university, that normally, if you're going to directly date a rock, it's going to have to be a rock from a melt. And so if you have an ash or a basalt or something like that, you can date it. If it's a sedimentary rock full of fossils, you're probably not going to be able to date it. But these sanidines provide a way around that, and that's what we've done here.
Lovely.
Yeah, I really like, Steve. One of the things I really like about this paper, as you said, I have done some of this sort of stuff in the past, and it's the combination of different dating which I think makes it really solid, right? You're not just looking at detrital zircon. So obviously detrital zircons can only tell us part of the story because they give us the oldest age, and that's cool here because that even so, the oldest age is still younger than you thought, right?
A few 100,000 years before the boundary. So that's the oldest. So that's why we actually think that the dinosaurs are probably much closer than 400,000 years. But you're right, the zircons are part of that story. They give you that maximum age. Then there's the paleomagnetism. We're lucky at the end of the Cretaceous that the asteroid hit during a very short interval of reversed magnetic polarity. So if you see reversed polarity in the rock, of course that, it's just black or white, up or down, you don't know. But if you have the context of the polarity changes, across a geological section, and then you have those detrital dates to pin them down, we can tell, okay, we have this detrital date that's very close to the boundary. It's in reverse polarity. That's good. That corroborates it. And then that helps us calibrate, not just those particular fossils in that layer, but the many different layers of fossils, different sets of dinosaurs, then, of course, the mammals that came after them as well.
Yeah, so for a little bit of context there, when we're talking about magnetostratigraphy and paleomagnetism, for people who might not know, the Earth's magnetic field has actually changed over time, so that magnetic north has switched from being aligned with geographic north to being aligned with geographic south. So the magnetic North Pole has flipped from north to south, and we can measure this in rocks because as rocks settle, as sediment grains settle out of a flow like a river or a lake or something like that, then all of the magnetic minerals kind of swing round like mini compass needles to point to the North Pole at the time, to point to the magnetic North Pole at the time. So you can measure this, and as the rock turns from sediment to rock, they get frozen. And we can measure this. We can go out and we can take samples of rock and we can go, right, was north at the geographic North Pole at this time, or was it at the geographic South Pole at this time? And so Steve said that we were in a reversed interval at the end of the Cretaceous, and this means that the magnetic North Pole actually sat at the South Pole at this time. And this is fine. You can, as Steve says, you can go through the rocks and you can find kind of stripes. You can find stripes, black. We typically label things at black when magnetic north and geographic north line up, and white when you get the South Pole lining up with the magnetic North Pole. And so you can identify the stripes, but it's really difficult to know where you are, right? Where you are relative to actual time. And the great thing about this study is that because they've got detrital zircons, which actually give an absolute date, they're able to say, oh, okay, so this reversal, this interval of reversed polarity, it corresponds to this location on the global polarity, the global magnetic polarity timescale, which is a timescale that has been constrained by drilling of oceanic rocks, basalts in the oceans, and we know the date of that very, very, very well. Actually, it's a better resolution, higher resolution than radiometric dating often, isn't it?
I'm always impressed by these geological shenanigans. As we know, the part of the shtick for this podcast is that Susie's the geologist and I'm the biologist, so I'm somewhat always perplexed and amazed by these sorts of things. But it does also remind me about when you're talking about the reversal, the poles. Like it's kind of fun to think about the Earth being a magnet just switching around north south every now and again. I wanted to, before we move on from the geology, I wanted to ask you a bit about this, what the field work's out there like, Steve. So what is field work like out there in New Mexico? I'm guessing quite dry.
It's dry, except when it does get wet, it gets really wet. There can be times of torrential rain. There have been a few times where we've been snowed on out there. Now we'll usually work in May or into early June. There's a narrow window of time where there's reasonable conditions, and before then, if you're in there in March or April, the temperature might be okay most of the time, but you might get snowed on. If you're in there kind of mid to late June throughout July, it's going to be way too hot. So we try to hit that sweet spot. And it's fun. It's fun field work because it's properly out in the Badlands. I mean, we're camping out there. We're cooking all our food out there. We're always
Susie's doing a face. So when you said the camping, Susie's immediately making a face there. She's such a camping fan.
I like field work where you get to stay in hotels with bars.
Well, in Cuba, New Mexico, there I think is one hotel, which it's not the sort of hotel we might want to stay in, and there's definitely not a bar, although there's often people drinking outside of that hotel about brown paper bags. But no, but this is camping that I think even folks that aren't big into camping would like, because you're not too far from civilization. We have our tents, we have our stove, we have our coolers. We can go every few days into town and get fresh food. And of course, we come stocked with, whiskey and tequila and everything, being New Mexico.
So
But
just to follow up on that, I have visited that part of the world once before, and my memory of it was it's mostly lots of Native American reserves and
yeah,
Native American stuff, petroglyphs and that sort of thing. So, I mean,
yeah,
you mentioned that you
no,
have to work with
no.
the communities. I mean, presumably you have to be quite careful here. I mean, if you're coming across petroglyphs or arrowheads, I mean, was that sort of thing happening? You said you were working with the Navajo communities.
Yeah, we were. So we're working the land that we would work on, and this is all work that, Tom Williamson has been doing for more than 30 years now, back to when he was a PhD student. And the work is mostly on BLM land, so Bureau of Land Management land, which is public land, land that belongs to me as an American taxpayer. There's also state land, that's New Mexico state land. And so, that's primarily the land we work on. You have to get permits. Of course, it's all very carefully regulated. And if you collect fossils, they go to the museum in Albuquerque, all part of the
Hmm.
rules. There is some privately owned land. We tend not to work on that out there. But in America, if it's your land, you can do what you want with it. And if there's fossils on there, you can let scientists collect them, or you can do it, you can collect them yourself and put them up for auction, whatever you want to do. Then there's also the Native American land, and there's reservations, but there's also patchwork land. And that's land we, of course, have to avoid unless we have absolute permission. And personally, I've never worked on the Native American land. Tom has over the years, and there's different tribes. There's actually a lot of different. The Navajo
Hmm.
tribe has been in that part of the world for many hundreds of years, and they have a large population. But there's also many other smaller tribes, these different pueblos,
Hmm.
and the Zia Pueblo, for instance, with that's where the famous sun symbol is on the New Mexico flag comes from. And some of these pueblos are very small. I mean, there's only a few hundred people that are members of the tribe, but they have land that they managed somehow through the the horrors of American history to maintain. And so we of course have to be very respectful that we would never go on Native American land and collect. But Tom and others in the past have worked with the tribes. We worked with the tribes in this project mostly through a place called Diné College, which is a Native American college, university, basically, that is mostly Navajo students. And Tom has had many Navajo students work with him as interns at the museum in Albuquerque in the lab, and also out in the field. So it's fun field work. It's great. There's great camaraderie with our group. I brought a lot of my Edinburgh students over the years out there. These
Nice.
very very pasty English and Scottish students that are lathering on factor 75,
Well, this is
sunscreen.
my memory of being in New Mexico. I will crisp up and burn immediately and turn into a gammon if
Yeah,
I'm not very careful.
yeah, yeah. And we cook the best food out there because, New Mexican food is very spicy. Anybody who's listening that maybe was at the SVP in Albuquerque, was quite a long time ago now, but maybe you remember the dinner. It was great, one of the best dinners, and they made this very spicy stuff for us with the local green chilies, and we just blast all the food with that. So our British students that come out, they get a crash course
Well, maybe we'll
in
look forward to
proper
some
cooking.
Birmingham Balties for SVP.
Yeah.
We'll have to look forward to it. I
Oh
don't know what they're
yeah.
going to put on for us. Yeah. Great. So I guess we probably need to actually get to the the actual paleontology, because we talked about the
Yes.
geology and the field work, but the main findings. So you guys did this massive study looking at the distribution of these organisms and looked at the provinciality, right? So this is a large database of the presence and absence of things in the north of North America and the south of South America. No, so the south of North America. So what did you find out?
So say we're focused on North America here just because North America, by the random luck and chance of geology, is just where the largest amount of fossils of dinosaurs and other land vertebrates from the very end of the Cretaceous are found. And not only the fossils, but generally these fossils are well dated, especially up in the north in Hell Creek area. So it's not that we're ignoring South America or Australia or Antarctica or whatever. It's just North America happens to be where the fossils are from that time, and they've been worked on for a long time. And so, it was back in the late 1800s that people like Cope were out collecting in these rocks in New Mexico, mostly mammals, but also dinosaurs. And many generations of paleontologists collected New Mexican dinosaurs after. So really, we've known these dinosaurs were there for a long time. There's many different dinosaur faunas in the late Cretaceous of New Mexico. They really span throughout the Campanian and Maastrichtian. So our group, we have collected more fossils over the years, but really, the big advance is the geochronology. And then when we got these dates, we didn't expect these dates because there had been debate about the age of these dinosaurs. And some people had argued that these particular dinosaurs, what we call the Na-Shoibato community of dinosaurs, that these particular dinosaurs were similar maybe to those from Hell Creek up north, the T-Rex and Triceratops and, Edmontosaurus and Ankylosaurus communities. Maybe they were the same age, but it wasn't like the identical species were there. So others argued that no, actually these Na-Shoibato dinosaurs in New Mexico are probably a bit older. And when we started doing our sampling and our field work, the status quo in most of the literature was that these Na-Shoibato dinosaurs were probably about 70 million years old. So about 4 million years before the asteroid. So, late Cretaceous, Maastrichtian, but not end Cretaceous, not terminal Cretaceous. So when we got these dates, and it really, like most research, especially most collaborative research, you do your sampling, the results come in drips and drops here and there as the different team members get to analyze things. We saw the zircon dates come in, and we saw the paleomag come in. It all came together, showing that these dinosaurs were very late as Cretaceous. They were there right before the asteroid. And that then prompted us to think more widely. Okay, we have these dinosaurs. They're there before the asteroid. They're living at the same time as those dinosaurs in Hell Creek, but they seem to be quite different. I mean, yeah, we have tyrannosaurs down south in New Mexico. There are horned dinosaurs. There are duck-billed dinosaurs. But down south in New Mexico, there's enormous sauropods. Alamosaurus, one of the biggest sauropods that ever lived, heavier than a Boeing 737. Was there, part of this Na-Shoibato community of dinosaurs. There's nothing like that up north in the Hell Creek. And there's different types of duck-billed dinosaurs and so on. So there seems to be a difference in the faunas. And there are other faunas from the Maastrichtian more generally, so the last 6 million years of the Cretaceous, from across North America. Most of them are not well dated enough to know if you're right at the very end, but at least we know they are in the last 5 or 6 million years. And so this, knowing that, there's more data out there, it prompted us to look at what the community structures of these dinosaurs were like. And this gets to this debate, something that's been in the dinosaur literature for a long time, really going back to when the Alvarez team presented their bombastic new theory of an asteroid causing the extinction. This idea that dinosaurs were declining from the Campanian to the end of the Maastrichtian, in large part because people were finding more dinosaurs in the Campanian. There were more species. And if you look at a simple list of species, if you do a download from the PBDB or something like that, yeah, there's more dinosaurs in the Campanian of North America than in the Maastrichtian. But of course, we all know now that the fossil record's incredibly biased. You have to take in those biases into account. People weren't really doing that in the 80s. People are doing that more now, but the debate's now kind of shifted that there's this idea that, okay, regardless of the number of species in the Campanian versus the Maastrichtian, that there's this change in the community structure of dinosaurs. In the Campanian, in North America, you had a lot of localized little faunas where it was different types of dinosaurs living in different places, and there was great provinciality across the continent. So different ones in the north than in the south. And that was the sign of a vibrant, thriving community, one that was adapting to local conditions, keeping pace with the times. And then that changed in the Maastrichtian. And this argument has been made, and it's not just rhetorical, it's been made based on statistical analyses and so on, that those vibrant Campanian faunas that are really provincial and broken up into lots of little communities, those change in the Maastrichtian, it becomes more uniform. The provinciality is gone. It's like a single cross-continental dinosaur fauna. It's T-Rex and Triceratops and Edmontosaurus everywhere. And the leap that some people started to take was that played a role in the extinction. That either that's a sign dinosaurs were declining, or that it made them more susceptible on that day the asteroid hit, having these more uniform cross-continental faunas versus the ones that were there before that were more diverse. We wanted to test that. Now we have this new fauna. We can accurately date it. We know it's the very end of the Cretaceous. We can pin it down. Let's take a broad survey of everything. So we worked with a couple of real statistical gurus. One is Ali Chiarenza, who we all know here, who's a paleontologist, but a very statistically minded paleontologist, great early career researcher. And also we worked with our colleague Jorge Garcia Giron, who is an ecologist, a proper ecologist in Spain, who uses a lot of these different ecological techniques to study modern communities. And so we tested this provinciality idea, and what we found is, now that we have more evidence, we have this new, dated fauna from New Mexico right at the end of the Cretaceous. When you pool together all the evidence we have now, we actually see that dinosaur faunas were still provincial in the Maastrichtium. The provinciality from the Campanian continued into the Maastrichtian. There was not just one boring, uniform, cross-continental dinosaur fauna in the Maastrichtian. When the asteroid hit, it hit at least a North America where there were different types of dinosaurs living in different places, depending on geography, but also we did a lot of ecological modeling, and we took into account paleogeography and temperature and precipitation and other things. And we can tell that temperature was a big part of driving which dinosaurs were living where. So, that's a very long-winded answer, but the take-home message really is that figuring out that these New Mexico dinosaurs lived at the very end of the Cretaceous prompted us just to look at all the evidence again. And we do not see any change from a provincial, rich, vibrant dinosaur world to a boring dinosaur world before the asteroid. When the asteroid hit, the dinosaurs were still adapting, still going strong, still forming different communities across North America.
Lovely. Thanks, Steve. I guess just as a follow-up then, so this idea that we might have had one big uniform, homogeneous, mix across all of the North American or potentially the world at the end, or we had a series of pockets of provinciality, and just people that aren't aware of provinciality, we're talking about like little zones of specialization. I mean, we're very much approaching this with the idea that little zones of specialization indicates that the dinosaurs are thriving, whereas a large homogeneous, one big block of fauna is not thriving. Is there a good reason for that?
That's another good point. I mean, I would argue that just because you have some more uniform fauna versus what was there 5 million years ago, I mean, that doesn't mean you're declining. It might just mean that you have a handful of species that have become really good at adapting to a bunch of environments, and they become more widespread. So I would never really have taken this argument that even if there was a change from rich provinciality to a more homogeneous fauna, that would mean dinosaurs were declining. It could mean the opposite. But I think more importantly, I could see, and I think, ecologically, you can make this argument that if there was a single more homogeneous fauna over a broad landscape, that could be more susceptible to collapse if there is an asteroid that falls out of the sky or big volcanic eruptions. And we see this in plenty of studies that have shown, that having a great diversity before some kind of forcing event, some kind of catastrophe can help your group survive. But, by and large, there's a lot of philosophical debate about this stuff. There's a lot of assertions that are made. A lot of people have just, of course, focused on this idea of, were dinosaurs in decline or not? And I think a lot of it just stems from the fact that beginning in the 80s with the Alvarez hypothesis for the asteroid, it was dinosaur paleontologists that were some of the biggest skeptics initially, and remain some of the biggest skeptics. First for the fact there was even an asteroid, and then once it became clear that there was an asteroid, it left a huge ass crater. And, okay, well, then some dinosaur paleontologists became skeptics of, well, did the asteroid actually do it? Or was the asteroid an innocent bystander, wrongfully
Hmm.
accused? It was really the, Deccan volcanoes. They're the ones on the grassy
Hmm.
knoll, really shooting Kennedy.
Grassy
The
knoll of
asteroid
the
is
Mesozoic.
Oswald up there in the building, wrongfully accused. But dinosaur
Whoa, whoa, whoa,
paleontologists have
whoa!
debated
Wrongfully
this.
accused now. You're making Never mind. I'm now thinking about. I have to interrogate your
That's
opinions about
That's a
Texas
whole different
assassinations. That's a
podcast.
whole
Whole
different
different.
podcast. There's a whole load of podcasts already fulfilling that need. Let's not go into that. Sorry. Yeah. Thanks, Steve. Before I want to move on to the wild speculation phase of of the discussion.
please.
But before we do that, Susie, do you have any questions about
Yeah,
the work?
I do actually, yeah, Steve. With regard to provinciality, I think one of the things that people have thrown up as a slight problem to the idea that that faunas were very provincial in the Western interior, either in the Campanian and in the Maastrichtian, is that there's no obvious barriers that would have been separating these different provinces. So, we know that for speciation to occur, or one of the major ways that speciation occurs is where we separate communities into separate groups that don't mix. They don't come into contact with each other, so they don't breed. And often that will be because there's a geographic barrier, like a mountain range or a seaway or something that separates these populations. Now, nobody's really managed to identify anything in Laramidia, at least, that would have separated these. Now, in the paper, you talk a lot about the temperature being a really big thing. And so do you see this as a temperature gradient, like a latitudinal temperature gradient across the continent?
This is a great question because when it comes to dividing up a landmass into different provincial faunas, yes, something has to do that. There has to be some barriers. Now, it is possible that in Western North America, which we can call Laramidia, at that time was kind of its own continent because there was a big seaway bisecting North America into two, and that seaway did fluctuate quite extensively and rapidly and crazy ways. So at times the seaway could have provided barriers, certainly provided barriers between the east and the west, but between the north and the south, I don't know. You could maybe argue that little arms of that seaway could have formed localized barriers. The Rocky Mountains were rising at the time. There would have been potential barriers there. But yeah, by and large, this was like a single, landmass. So if there was provinciality, we argue that there was. Statistically, we find it. Nobody's ever argued that against provinciality in the Campanian. It's really just the Maastrichtian at the very end of the Cretaceous where people have said this uniform fauna developed. So there is provinciality, undoubtedly. And what's driving it? We think temperature probably is one of the main factors. We don't find a clean north-south division in either the Campanian or the Maastrichtian provinces. And there's definitely a geographic signal. You could see that a lot of, there is kind of a general similarity between faunas in the north, and then another general similarity between faunas in the south, but there's exceptions to that rule. And those exceptions seem to largely be temperature. There are things in the north that are a bit more southern because the temperature seems to be a bit more southern, and vice versa. Now, this is, of course, based on climate models and precipitation models, these Earth system models that have become really in vogue over the last decade or so. And of course, there's uncertainties there. But there has been, independent of our work, there has been a pretty extreme temperature gradient that's been identified from geological proxies, from paleoclimatologists looking at the rocks across Laramidia in the Campanian and the Maastrichtian. So there's lots of independent evidence that, yeah, this was basically a single landmass, yeah, with some mountains, with the sea lapping against it, but the temperature variation was quite extreme. So we think, and we argue in the paper, because we have statistical methods that can actually tell us which of these different aspects, geography, precipitation, temperature, is most related to provinciality. It seems like temperature probably was a big driver, which makes total sense to me. I mean, we know that just in the world today, there's plenty of plants and animals that can only really persist at certain temperatures, and change the climate a little bit, and they're in trouble.
Thanks, Steve. We're running a bit out of time, so I want to move on to the wild speculation part because we need to leave time for wild speculation, I think.
We do.
We do. Susie's in agreement, right? I don't know if we should rename the podcast for Wild Speculation. And well, we've already had the fossil fails. I don't know if we want to move into. I should ask Steve for his recommendations for fossil fails. Maybe privately. I don't want you to publicly ask what you think your best examples of fails in paleontology are.
Oh.
But let's ask. Let's move on to speculation. What if? So this is a question I ask my undergraduates sometimes when I just want to get them to think, rather than thinking about just like splurging facts out onto the page. What if the asteroid missed? What happens then? To hear the rest of our discussion with Steve Brusatte and the answer to that question, tune in next week where we continue our discussion about dinosaurs before the asteroid hit. The Fossil Files was presented by Robert Sansom and Susanna Maidment. You can find more information, including links to the original papers that were discussed, at fossils.libsyn.com, and you can contact us at fossilfiles.pod@gmail.com.